We will be doing another George Webb reading, The Ghost in the Machine, the true story of what happened to Seth Rich. George Webb answers the unanswered questions about Seth Rich after the FBI publishes a pulpy 68 heavily redacted pages in a 20,000-page file. Here's our Seth Rich in a bit of an artsy form. Preface. New Seth Rich documents released 4 years later support George Webb's story. In April 2021, just after the meager 68 pages of the heavily redacted file of DNC staffer Seth Rich were released out of an FBI file of 20,000 pages, I got a flood of questions about this on my daily live streaming show. People in the live chat were asking me about Seth Rich. Was he a good guy or a bad guy? I, George Webb, was the citizen journalist that had come to Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2017. I resurrected the case in the mind of the American public. In his daily live streaming show, in a book talk about Adam Schiff's spy ring in the U.S. Congress, D.C. investigative journalist George Webb was asked repeatedly about the newly released Seth Rich files, which were highly redacted. I had come to D.C. to walk the last 24 hours of Seth Rich's life, follow the blood trail of his feet over and over again until I left no stone unturned. It turned out I would stay over 4 years working the story, including becoming very good friends with DC attorney, writing a book about Seth Rich, who recently died at the age of 52, and an investigative journalist I will call Deep Trade. I will get back to DC attorney Brian Lloyd's story at another time, but suffice to say that these two journalists also poured a massive amount of time into researching the Seth Rich case. Journalist George Webb walked the supposed last steps of DNC staffer Seth Rich countless times beginning May of 2017. No matter how much George Webb tried to make the pieces of the Seth Rich story fit, no evidence supporting the story emerged. He's always on site. My strategy was to go to the last two neighborhoods that Seth Rich was in the night of his death and literally try to speak to every person who might have seen him on the supposed 50-minute drunken walk through some of DC's worst neighborhoods at 3 a.m. in the morning. The alt-right media was fixated for a time on the exploits of the journalist George Webb trying to get to the bottom of the DNC leak and the Seth Rich murder story in the summer of 2017. Even though I have written on this Seth Rich topic in passing in 3 of the 20 different books I have written, I decided to get down on paper the Seth Rich fact file specifically for this book. Awan minutes past midnight, journalist Webb writes about the true spy ring embedded inside the DNC and shows Seth Rich was a diversion. You can pick that up on Amazon if you'd like. In George Webb's book, Blackberries Matter, I already read that for you guys, he outlines the forensic evidence of the spy ring in the DNC and the Joe Biden advisor that told him what was really going on inside the DNC. I have written about Seth Rich in passing as the story that brought me to Washington, D.C., but now a few files of the Seth Rich case have been released by the FBI vindicating my story. I want to specifically focus on the Seth Rich story in this book. I never intended to write a book about Seth Rich in the 4 years I walked to DC looking for the answers to the case. I was always looking to get at the root of the spy ring embedded in the Democratic National Committee, which literally works as a front to bring in foreign operatives into the U.S. election. In fact, to show I have avoided trying to capitalize on the popularity of the Seth Rich story, you can read the first time I mentioned the covering an FBI man working for Hoover in DC trying to break another spy ring over 50 years ago in my book, Let's Call Him McDuff. So with that being said, here's the ghost in the DNC machine. Chapter 1, Gumshoe Journalism. I had a successful career in network engineering and software before coming to Washington, D.C. to work on the Seth Rich case and the spy ring in Congress in 2017. I literally had no desire to take a vow of poverty being a citizen journalist, but I have seen the unbelievable distortions of our democracy by the DNC and FBI in the 2016 presidential race, and I felt if I didn't come to Washington, D.C. to do something about it, nobody would. And for the people that don't know, George Webb used to be a diehard Democrat and even voted for Obama. Not anymore. Journalist George Webb walked the blood trail of Seth Rich countless times, most of the time between the hours of 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. to see exactly what Seth Rich saw and what witnesses may have seen in the killing. I was truly surprised about how easy it was going to go to the top of the heap in Washington, D.C. as a reporter, just by going out and pounding the pavement, asking everybody wearing shoes if they had seen everything. Very quickly, I was the guest on international radio and television shows just because I went to the actual scene of the crimes in the worst neighborhood of D.C. and asked everyone questions. Even black tough guy radio hosts who had spent over a decade covering the mean streets of D.C. were impressed with the courage. But I was a man on a mission to find out the truth about the DNC. Was it a hack or a leak? I had no investigative background, but my brother had a lot of success in journalism at a young age, so a few things rubbed off on me. He had managed to interview Vice President Dan Quayle and President George H.W. Bush at a young age while in the Air Force, and he was quite well respected in the George H.W. Bush camp for settling up remote press communication tents before cell phones became ubiquitous. It didn't take long for George Webb to rise to the cream of the crop of D.C. reporters because most of the D.C. press corps refused to get off their couch. I had learned it was not just a matter of learning the 5 W's of journalism, but you have to go out and get the interview first before you can start asking any questions. I had always admired and closely watched my brother's journalist achievements, so I just decided to emulate what he did all those decades before. George Webb and Jason Goodman interview an ex-DC police officer, Rod Wheeler, about the Seth Rich case, the key investigator for DC's top news channel in May of 2017. More than 4,000 on-site investigative Gumshoe videos were destroyed by YouTube with 1 minute's warning, but many copies like the one above exist on other research channels. Excuse me, got bugs raining on me. George Webb asked Detective Rod Wheeler why the FBI seized Seth Rich's laptop and phones in the Seth Rich murder was just a botched robbery by 2 knuckleheads. I, along with my filmmaker partner at the time, went right to the top by interviewed the top detective assigned to the case, who had been a detective with the DC Metro Police Department. I am sure my scores of videos walking the last steps of Seth Rich prompted this "it's just a botched robbery" cover story by Wheeler. The DC Police Department was very ingrained with the DC, with Amy Dacey having been at very high levels in both organizations. Amy Dacey was the execs at the DNC that broke the DNC hacking story at the National Correspondents' Dinner the previous year in May of 2016. I learned my first valuable lesson here in DC. If you burn the pavement, the deep state will come out of hiding to tell you that you are on the wrong track to provide you valuable additional data about the case. Metadata. Here's our Rod Wheeler snake in the grass. Chapter 2. No evidence of a murder anywhere, no matter how hard I looked. I was new in journalism, so I kept double and triple checking myself, checking with other DC journalists on all aspects of the story. I engaged Lee Stranahan, who worked for Steve Bannon at Breitbart before Bannon gutted the right-leaning outlet of real journalists. Lee had done a lot of work on the Ukrainian connection to the DNC, and he had received lots of text messages from Gumshoe, the supposed DNC hacker. Lee had also done a lot of work on CrowdStrike, the firm that was called to investigate the DNC hack, which I was saying at the time was a leak. George Webb and journalist Lee Stranahan in front of the CrowdStrike office in Virginia. George Webb is such a giant. After my first meeting with Lee and Ruth Chris in Virginia, he had given me key info about a mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, where the 9/11 hijackers had been given their $100,000 by a Pakistani intelligence chief, and I very much believed that was the real CIA spy ring operating in DC, not this Gumshoe distraction meant to lead reporters away from the CIA and FBI's machinations inside U.S. elections. I had a leak versus hack friendly debate here with Lee later on in the street in front of CrowdStrike's offices in Virginia. I had seen Steve Bannon's text messages interlaced with Gumshoe's messages on Lee's phone, almost like Bannon was checking to see if Lee took the Gumshoe bait. I thought this was a diversion away from the true DNC story from the get-go, but then again, I wasn't the seasoned DC reporter working for Breitbart at the White House. I remember openly laughing at Lee with his description of 3 Chalupa sisters at the DNC at a meeting in June of 2017. I said these were obviously fake names, Chalupa being a derogatory slang term for a female's anatomy involved in prostitution. But I could see by how serious Lee was that he had taken the Gumshoe bait, although he later broke the real Ukraine Gate story, for which he deserves a Pulitzer Prize. Journalist George Webb staking out the Al-Hiraj Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia. The mosque had passed the 9/11 hijackers $100,000 through a Pakistani intelligence general using an encrypted BlackBerry device from a company called P-Tech, Pakistani Tech. Webb believes the Awan spy ring in Congress used the same encrypted BlackBerries. Despite conferring with Stranahan and other more mainstream journalists who did not want to be identified at the time, I found no evidence Seth Rich had actually died. No autopsy, no death certificate, no admission papers to the MedStar Hospital, no surveillance cam pictures on a long 50-minute drunken walk through DC at 3:40 a.m., no body cameras on police, no witnesses at the hospital, nothing. I made countless videos going to Lou's Bar and Grill talking to Joe Capone, the owner, sitting in Seth Rich's chair, day after day, asking questions of the staff, visiting Seth's previous addresses, going everywhere his friends and associates live. Associates, oh dear. Sitting in Seth Rich's chair day after day, asking questions of the staff, visiting Seth's previous addresses, going everywhere his friends and associates lives to ask questions. And there was no evidence anywhere, so I coined a term to describe this situation: a school play based on Seth's summer camp training at a drama camp in Wisconsin that he and his girlfriend had attended. Much like a kindergarten version of Little Red Riding Hood, the Seth Rich death seemed like a school play. The term stuck, and now it is used all over the world instead of more arcane term false flag. George Webb coined the term school play. Yeah. This is on Reddit, I believe. But the more important question was, what was the school play covering up? Fortunately, I would have an insider who was an advisor to Joe Biden for decades tell me the answer only a few weeks later, and he left me proof with a Senate BlackBerry device. Chapter 3, DNC Spy Ring Cover-Up. When I coined the term school play, I offered an alternative proposition. What if the FBI was bringing in long-term DIA informants to every election cycle in the U.S. to dangle and lure DNC emails to Republican opposition and then the Trump campaign? Literally, D.C. was awash in long-term DIA and CIA informants everywhere you looked on both sides of the aisle. I had called out Felix Sater as a long-time DIA informant embedded in the Trump organization for over a decade. Why couldn't Seth Rich be an oil and gas guy working for Warren Buffett on a Chinese energy deal that was just brought in for the election to offer DNC emails to the Trump people? Here's a Wall Street Journal screenshot. Ex-Trump affiliates secretly worked with prosecutors, FBI, and CIA for years. Russian-born businessman Felix Sater went above and beyond in cooperating after facing fraud charges in 1998. Journalist George Webb was proven correct that DIA informant Felix Sater was embedded in the Trump organization as a long-term informant 2 years after Webb made that prediction. Why did I say Seth Rich was an oil and gas pipeline guy working for Warren Buffett on Chinese and Russian energy deals, rather than a DNC programmer working on a how to get to the polls program to turn out the vote? I said that because Seth Rich was working for an oil and gas pipeline guy who worked for Warren Buffett in Nebraska on Chinese and Russian energy deals. That's why. That would later be confirmed by a man who represented himself as a 40-year advisor to Joe Biden in a meeting in Alexandria, Virginia in May of 2017. A private commitment. A nonprofit Clinton Global Initiative acts as a matchmaker to arrange monetary commitments from companies and people or nonprofits to address global challenges. They typically go to nonprofits, but a $2 million commitment in September 2010 went to a for-profit company, Energy Pioneer Solutions, partly owned by people with ties to the Clintons. Here are some details. Scott Cleed, 29%, founder of former Democratic congressional candidate in Nebraska. Here's 29%, also longtime friends of Bill Clinton. Julie Tauber McMahon, Chappaqua, New York, 5%. Andrew Tobias, Democratic National Committee Treasurer. Mark Weiner, owner of firm that sells campaign goods, including to the Hillary Clinton campaign, 3%. Other investors, including friends of Mr. Klebe in Nebraska, another 29%. Jane Eckert, owner of Eckert Fine Art in Pine Plains, New York. And Kim Samuel, an academic and a director of Samuel Group of companies involved in Steeled CGI, announced $2 million commitment to EPS from her. She later reduced it to $500,000. Mr. Tobias indicated he made up some or all of the rest. Just want to read it yourself? I guess you can. Journalist George Webb immediately focused on Seth Rich's boss, Scott Klebe, upper left, who received large grants from the Clinton Foundation for oil and gas pipeline operations in the United States, China, and Russia. Webb also identified the other members of Energy Pioneer Solutions that were also part of Resources for the Future, a money laundering foundation set up to feed dark energy money back into the DNC. Again, I was to learn that cracking the code in Washington, D.C., that is, seeing through the cover stories to see them as simply pass-through for illegal energy operations, brought out the whistleblowers. Within 2 weeks, I had a long-term Biden advisor dropping a Senate BlackBerry in my lap, basically saying, "You're on the right track, kid." Here's the BlackBerry our George Webb got a hold of. Without the serial numbers being blurred out. A long-term Biden advisor that I called Deep BlackBerry dropped a Senate BlackBerry in my lap, confirming my Russia theory. My theory about Seth Rich being a front for Warren Buffett's energy plans in the United States, Russia, and China. Warren Buffett had long been associated with Rothschild Energy. Rothschild Energy had energy plays all over the world, including China's Belt and Road mega project, the New Silk Road. Deep BlackBerry bore an astonishing resemblance to Ambassador Bill Taylor, a fixture of the first Trump impeachment. There's another screenshot of ChinaDaily.com.cn. CEFC, China Energy, Rothschild & Co. to team up. And you might even find out Warren Buffett is using Hunter Biden to procure the uranium for Belt and Road reactors in Kazakhstan. George Webb associate Seth Rich with Scott Klebe and Warren Buffett, both associated with Rothschild Energy, and a wine-soaked 3-hour meeting with the 40-year Biden advisor. The net was, I was told, that must be a typo. The net I was sold. I was told I was correct about Seth Rich being a school play being brought in by the FBI for the election, and I was right about him being an energy guy for Warren Buffett in China, Russia, and Indonesia. I also learned that he was friends with Anthony Bourdain in Indonesia, where he liked to hang out with President Obama, and Seth Rich may have traveled with Bourdain's camera crew to have a cover story for doing energy deals. I was still an Obama supporter at the time, so I bristled at suggestions there may have been a relationship between Bourdain and Obama. In any case, the key takeaway from the meeting was that I was right about Seth Rich being a school play. The real DNC spy ring in Congress was being run by Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And Biden was being hung out to dry as a compromised vice president. The encrypted BlackBerries given by the State Department to the Congress for senators to negotiate treaties like the Iran nuclear deal had been used for covert action instead of the U.S. House cabal using advisor Imran Awan to deliver encrypted devices to key kickback districts around heavily Democratic cities in the United States. George Webb compared the break-in at the DNC headquarters in 1972 to entrap Richard Nixon in a cover-up to the DNC hacking hoax. To the right is a picture of the BlackBerry left with George Webb by 40-year Biden advisor. That's what a $50,000 phone looks like. I pointed out in the videos at the time that Deep BlackBerry's story squared with the Iran nuclear deal being negotiated by all key participants on encrypted BlackBerries from the Senate. I had also worked with key person at CrowdStrike who had done the cleanup on aisle 7 at the DNC, erasing the electronic footprint of these covert actions and kickbacks. One Dmitry Alperovich. Dmitry wrote backdoors in virus while he was at McAfee, and I accused him of writing backdoors into the encrypted BlackBerries so that the CIA could see how senators would vote on the Iran nuclear deal. The FBI had given this same backdoor code to a company in Canada called Phantom Secure through the intermediary of Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I immediately said this was the device used by the drug rat line Imran Awan and his drug kingpin in Pakistan, Daewoo Ibrahim. Dimitri's signature was all over these backdoor BlackBerries. Backdoor BlackBerry, backdoor. He had just repurposed the Phantom Secure BlackBerries to spy on the U.S. Senate for the Iran nuclear deal negotiations. Deep BlackBerry was telling me the truth. FBI tried to plant a backdoor in an encrypted phone network. I don't know where this article is from, but it's by Joseph Cox. The FBI wanted a backdoor in Phantom Secure, an encrypted phone company that's sold to members of the Sinaloa cartel and which is linked to the alleged leaking of sensitive law information in Canada. Alperovich, CrowdStrike. George Webb's speculation that Dmitry Alperovich had reproduced drug network encrypted BlackBerries to spy on senators considering the Iran nuclear deal. The 40-year Biden advisor also had one key piece of information that had not become public about Imran Awan. Imran had come into the United States through a Rockefeller cutout called Inner America. This was later confirmed publicly in informational hearing held by Jim Jordan in the U.S. Congress questioning Luke Rosiak of the Daily Caller. Deep BlackBerry was the real deal, and his confirmation of my working theories would rewrite the history of the last 10 years of covert action. Chapter 4. Did Donna Brazil drive Seth Rich from the hospital to the airport for a getaway? The same woman who met Bill Clinton on the tarmac and said, "Oh, we're just talking about our grandchildren." Yeah. 4 years now, I have been convinced that by Deep BlackBerry, I was right about the covert action BlackBerries, so I didn't focus much on the cover story of Seth Rich being a school play. But in April of 2021, after the meager, heavily redacted 68-page release of the 20,000-page FBI file on Seth Rich, questions kept coming up in my live streams for me to explain this more fully. In April 2021, live stream questions were still coming up about John Podesta cutouts, with Seth Rich called Resources for the Future and a cutout to move uranium called ARMZ. The Podesta Group folded operations in D.C. one day after George Webb served CEO Kim Fritz in a lawsuit against the DNC. Deep BlackBerry had told me there was a close relationship between Seth Rich and Donna Brazile, and the noise in the press about an argument between them was to distract from this key link. Is would later call the fake fighting to create a diversion from a crucial link, hair pulling, as in when two sisters cutely pull each other's hair, in a mock fight when they are really quite close. There's an insider screenshot. Donald Trump Jr. revived an unfounded conspiracy theory about the Clintons on Sunday. It came amid a controversy over Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Brazile and a new tell-all book. Donna Brazile acted as if she had a spat with Seth Rich over the DNC emails. Journalist George Webb characterized this fake spat as hair pulling. Why did I coin the term hair pulling? Because Deep Blackberry told me Donna Brazile had come to the MedStar hospital to take Seth Rich to the airport for a flight to Indonesia. This claim was so outrageous that I tangentially referred to it by saying Seth Rich's name and wondering out loud where he went after the school play while filming the Indonesian consulate flag in New York. Later, it was confirmed that indeed Donna Brazile was a visitor to Seth Rich's hospital room that night. Donna Brazile on Seth Rich conspiracies. He had no interactions with WikiLeaks or Russians. Journalist George Webb was told Seth Rich was taken by Donna Brazile to an airport in the D.C. area. Webb speculated that Andrews Air Force Base was the closest military airport used frequently by Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff. George Webb also ran down the leads that Imran Awan had made a similar military plane getaway to the U.S. Air Base Anacostia for a helicopter trip to Pax River Naval Air Station for being a chain of flights that would take him back to Pakistan. Donna Brazile was making the talk show rounds in 2017 to knock down Seth Rich conspiracy theory. But the one topic she never touched was that Seth Rich was still alive, finishing his school play to dangle DNC emails for the Trump campaign. Asked by moderator George Stephanopoulos about her critics within the Democratic Party, Brazile told them to go to hell. She went on, and I say go to hell because why am I supposed to be the only person that is unable to tell my story? I have heard a lot of people tell me various things as well, but here's what they don't know. They don't know what it's like to bury a child. I did, Seth Rich. Journalist George Webb has long maintained that DNC chairwoman Donna Brazile has long known the disposition of Seth Rich because she took him to the airport for a getaway. Donna Brazile has frequently described Seth Rich as her child and how she has buried her child with Seth Rich's death. With Seth Rich's death. Anyway, Donna Brazile is telling the truth. Her job was to make sure that Seth Rich got the DNC files and that his laptop frequently used as a Dropbox to back up those files to an unsecured Dropbox. I speculated that the Dropbox backup was malware with a Dmitry Alperovitch signature called X-Agent and X-Tunnel. I speculated that the Dropbox was the same Dropbox used by Imran Awan to send terabytes to Pakistan for over a decade from the U.S. House of Representatives Library of Congress servers. We still don't know if that speculation has been proven true or not, since the FBI release of the Seth Rich documents has been so paltry and so redacted. That will have to be subject for a future book. Money from an Iraq political figure. Imran and Abid operated a car dealership referred to as CIA. That was the acronym for the actual name. It's not stating it here. Like Car International Associates or something. That took $100,000 from an Iraq government official who is a fugitive of the U.S. authorities. According to a business partner's testimony in a civil lawsuit, Imran was banned another email address that belonged to him, 123@mail.house.gov, appeared to be inactive and invoked the name of a national security and foreign affairs specialist for Rep. Andre Carson, an Intelligence Committee member. Journalist George Webb speculated that Seth Rich's DNC files were a very small set of sanitized DNC covert action files designed to be intercepted to throw suspicion away from Hillary Clinton to transfer the suspicion to Trump. George Webb retraced his steps before, during, and after his meeting with Deep Blackberry, a longtime Joe Biden advisor. George Webb shows where Biden Senate Blackberry was left for him. And here's our Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Between the Devil and the DNC, George Webb's first free book was Between the Devil and the DNC. Webb updates this workbook for citizen journalists in April 2021 called Citizen Journal, available on Amazon. George Webb Citizen Journalist workbook entitled Citizen Journal is available on Amazon in 5x7 format at nnhour.com, Neighborhood News Hour, in an 8x11 workbook format. George Webb is in the process of publishing George Webb's Deep State Playbook about the ruses and guises used about DNC and RNC to fool the American people. Here's a sample below. You guys want to pick it up? It's available right now. Trump tweeted about Imran Awan when he met with Putin in Helsinki. Trump knew who really hacked the DNC. Author, journalist George Webb had written several best-selling books about the Imran spy ring in Congress. I'm not really sure what you're going to get out of that, but... Imran Awan, Deep State operative. Imran Awan is a suspected Pakistani ISI intelligence officer that worked on Capitol Hill for a dozen years. Awan illegally logged into Democratic National Committee and U.S. congressional servers over 5,111 times, probably due to a batch process sending terabytes of U.S. Congress and paramilitary police contact in Punjab, Pakistan. Imran's father, Muhammad Awan, was closely associated with the Pakistani ordnance factory, and he was involved in the swindling of 12 farms from local Faisalabad, Pakistan, for a suspected biological facility with then U.S. Congressman Rahm Emanuel. Awan reportedly spent 9 months a year in Pakistan, making $160,000 a year congressional salary after outfitting over 45 Democratic congresspersons with encrypted BlackBerry communications devices, including Anthony Weiner, Rahm Emanuel, Keith Ellison, Maxine Waters, Joe Crowley, Ted Lieu, Eric Swalwell, and Adam Schiff. Awan had over 20 businesses and safe houses in the Washington, D.C. area that were visited by investigative journalist George Webb and his now deceased partner Jenny Moore. Imran Awan may have just been a frontman for a Defense Intelligence Agency biological weapons program that transferred information to the government of China through the intermediary of Pakistan. D.C. journalist George Webb was given a congressional BlackBerry, which traced back to a Defense Intelligence Agency cryptographic communications specialist named Matthew Gonter. Imran Awan also had a Virginia safe where he stored the encrypted devices that was rented by a Navy cryptographer named Vernier Taggart, that also was a Navy corpsman at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Imran Awan also had a house close to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which the Taggarts also shared. Webb and Moore visited the locations involved numerous times to interview witnesses who had participated in animal experimentation protests and experimental vaccine trials. Hunter Biden, patsy for the China Belt and Road. No, Hunter Biden's laptop isn't the story. Hunter Biden's BlackBerry actually tells the real story. Steve Bannon's close association will all aspects of Hunter Biden's laptop story throws the whole story into a covert story realm. And for good reason. Hunter Biden's BlackBerry unlocks all the China and Central Asia energy deals done by Warren Buffett and Rothschild Energy through a cutout company called CEFC. George Webb's books take you in detail through all the travels of Hunter Biden's BlackBerry. The important thing to know up front, however, is 3 years before the Hunter Biden laptop surfaced, DC reporter Webb had produced and photographed a Senate BlackBerry from a whistleblower who stated that these encrypted BlackBerries were used for China and Russia energy deals by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The whistleblower, who George Webb nicknamed Deep BlackBerry, also hinted that the Senate Armed Service Committee was involved with the House of Representatives in arms deals, but Biden's weren't involved. 3 years later, a Navy man named Tony Bobulinski with a top secret clearance came forward to say that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and James Biden all used encrypted BlackBerries for energy deals in China, dealing the state. Oh, I gotta start that over. 3 years later, a Navy man named Tony Bobulinski with a top secret clearance came forward to say that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and James Biden all used encrypted BlackBerries for energy deals in China, dealing the state-run nuclear industry. Tony Bobulinski delivered real evidence and real confirmation for BlackBerries being the key devices used for the below-the-table deals. As of April 2021, alternative media still hasn't realized where the real story is that unlocks the corruption of the back dealing. The encrypted BlackBerries hold the most promise for delivering indictments, not Steve Bannon's laptop diversion leading to a fake evidence that will be easily dismissed. Tony Bobulinski is a key linchpin to Joe, James, Hunter Biden in a firm called Sinohawk, thought to be a drone surveillance company. Here's our Bobulinski. Everyone was losing their shit when he was on Tucker's show. And that's it for today.